And now we should be there. Perfect. All right. Again, though, this is like anything like what do we do? It's taped, so
Hmm.
if you have to stop for anything, let me make sure that I've got. Okay, now what am I hearing? Do you hear a noise?
I don't.
Wonder what that is. Hold on one second for me. I apologize.
Hmm.
Okay, so it's not audition. Am I losing my mind or something? What in the world? I mean,
Is it my fan behind me? Is it a woo 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 woo?
oh, that's what. Okay, all right.
Let me turn. I'll turn it off. Let me turn it off. Here.
Oh man, I was.
It's hot. It's hot up here, Luis. It's hot.
I apologize. I know I have to turn off my AC because it is loud. It's one of those wall. I
Yeah.
live in a little tiny space, so I was like, wow. Okay,
Is that
good.
better?
There you go.
Was that what it was? Oh
I
my goodness.
was I was having a moment like, dude, am I just getting old and I'm hearing things?
Well, if you see me sweating, you'll know what it is. So.
I will. All right, let's get started. That way, you're not sweating for too long. All right, you know what? Let's just. Let's start with this. I wanted to. I know I've talked to you before, but for the purposes of this podcast, when did you start reporting on NASA and the space industry?
I think it was 2014, and there was a particular NASA mission happening in 2014, and that's when I started covering space. And to kind of bring it into perspective, the space shuttle program ended in 2011, and we really didn't talk about space for a very long time. And in 2014, there was this mission that happened, and I started covering it. And after that, that was kind of around the same time SpaceX was getting big here in Central Florida. Other private space companies happened, but yeah, there wasn't much happening back then, but there's a lot happening right now. So in the 10 years or the 8 years since then, it's been a very busy time for space exploration.
I think that's so interesting that we've had a space program for so long, but for a long time, nobody was talking about it.
Hmm.
That's so weird. I mean, you're in Orlando at WMFE, but how often do you go out to Cape Canaveral?
I'm there for every human space launch, which we assumed wasn't going to be very often, but it is very often now. So it's about every 6 months I go out there to report on humans leaving this planet, and then I'm also there for major space science missions. So probably every 3 or 4 months I go out there to watch a rocket leave this planet and take a payload or humans off this Earth.
So what's happening with NASA right now? I mean, since the space shuttle missions ended, and so much of what we keep hearing is about billionaires and their rockets, and and all that. I mean, it. Some people actually, I'm sure you've heard this, probably think that NASA's gone and we don't have a space program.
Hmm. So NASA still has the International Space Station, right? I mean, we've got this international collaboration where humans have been on orbit for the past 22 years. I mean, the International Space Station came along in 2000. But what we're seeing from Florida is every 6 months, these private companies are launching these crews of NASA astronauts up to the space station. And so we're seeing starting back in 2019, 2020, we saw the first crew of 2 people, and then we started seeing crews of 4 people go up there. We're seeing them go up there and then every 6 months return back to Earth. And that's just the government agencies, right? That's NASA sending humans up there. We've also seen some private citizens go up there. We saw over the summer last year, we saw the Inspiration 4 mission. There was 4 private citizens that bought tickets to go to space, went up there for 3 days, and then came back. And then next month, we're going to see another crew of 4 people go up to space in SpaceX's Crew Dragon capsule. dock to the International Space Station for a few days and then come back. So we're seeing so many human beings leave this earth than we've ever seen before in the past 10 years. And it's all because of these commercial space companies.
What does that say, though? I mean, and I'm not. There's no judgment, good or bad. I'm not saying like oh, this is good or a bad thing that it's we now have commercial companies doing this kind of thing, but that we have other people who are trying to get into space, whether for tourism or for science or something else. Maybe they're like I said, trying to get to Mars. Um, but it's not NASA that's at the forefront of all this, or maybe they are, and we're not talking about them enough. I don't know. I mean, what do they think about all this? What do they think about Bezos and Musk and Branson?
Mhm.
Getting into the game like this.
The groundwork was definitely laid by NASA to provide this opportunity for commercial space companies to even exist. If I mean, I'm not sure how much time we have here, Luis, but if we talk about if it wasn't for commercial space, SpaceX wouldn't be here, right? I mean, they got saved in the final hour because of a contract with NASA to send commercial cargo up there.
Hmm.
But since then, they've been able to do all these great things. But there are other commercial space companies, as you mentioned. There are Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, all this stuff. I think what has happened with the commercial space industry is it's made this opportunity for other people to get into space. It's made access to space much easier and much cheaper. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing for everybody.
What's this latest story that there's going to be an unmanned mission to the moon, but they're sending an Alexa?
Yeah.
What?
So Alexa's going to the moon. But I mean, the whole point of that Alexa going to the moon is knowing that there are going to be people coming right afterwards. So this is a completely different mission that you're talking about here. So we've been talking about these commercial space
Hmm.
missions. This Alexa mission is going on. It's going on the next NASA mission to the moon, which is Artemis 1, and that's launching in the next few months here. And it'll be an uncrewed mission. Nobody's going to be in the capsule. It's going to go around the moon and then come back. And then the next mission, Artemis 2, will be people will be in the capsule and they go around the moon and then come back. And then Artemis 3 will be people are in the capsule. They'll stop at a space station around the moon and then they'll go down to the moon surface and plant their flag and do all that thing. But to answer your question, in Artemis 1, they've put an Alexa inside the capsule. And they want to see that if astronauts are flying in this capsule, if they can talk to this computer, and how will that help them stay connected back here on Earth, and how will that help them feel more connected to Earth when they're 250,000 miles away
Mm.
from this planet? So it's very interesting to see Alexa and all this stuff heading to the moon.
I want to pull a practical joke and ask the Alexa to order a pizza and see if the pizza guy goes, "I'm sorry, where's your address?"
So the things that it's an Alexa. It's a locally distributed Alexa. So you can't say like, "Hey Alexa, send me whatever," but you can say, "Hey Alexa, turn on the capsule lights," and the lights will turn on. Or you can say, "Hey Alexa, how long until we have to do this? This burn to get us into orbit?" And she'll say, "Oh, it'll be 294 seconds." So they've definitely catered it towards this particular mission. You can't order a pizza at the moon just yet.
Not yet,
Just
I
yet,
know.
Louis.
It's. I mean, it's kind of interesting. You think about it, and you could appreciate this too. Is like, where did we see this before? Oh yeah, there was a movie where guys were talking to a computer. Hal, do this for me. Hal,
I
do
have
that for
been
me.
told. I talked to the folks that have programmed this particular Alexa, and I said, "Have you all seen that?" And they said, "Oh, they Alexa will not be able to open the pod bay doors. We promise you that. We promise you that." So at least they're thinking about that. They're thinking about that.
Alexa can't be programmed to, mess up the mission and hurt
Exactly.
anybody.
Exactly. Exactly.
I got to ask you about. I love your podcast, and I got to ask
Thank
you
you.
how it's going. Anybody who doesn't know, you have a space podcast called "Are We There Yet?" The Space Exploration Podcast. When you pitch that, I mean, it seems like such a no-brainer. Like, yeah, let's do this. Was it a hard sell?
I pitched that podcast 6 years ago, and it was right when we were talking about how there weren't many, space missions happening here. And I had pitched a lot of space stories to my news editor at the time, and she said, "We don't have any room in the newscast for these. Why don't you just start your own podcast about all these space stories?" And that's how it started. And
And
I'm
it's
glad she said that.
it has. I mean, in a very short period of time. By the way, anybody who hasn't noticed, I mean, you had a lot of success. You've been that thing is just like a rocket. Let's use the metaphor. It's like a rocket. That thing took off, and it's been doing really well. I mean, congratulations, first of all. What have you learned from the audiences about the thirst for this, kind of storytelling?
I've learned that everybody is super excited about this, right? I mean, this is something that I thought that was just, you know, it was just something that I was interested in. And so, my news director was like, "Well, yeah, nobody's really interested in this stuff. So just go ahead and pitch a podcast, and if there are people who are going to listen to your podcast, they'll listen to your podcast." We launched the podcast. It was in Apple's, top 10 the first week we sent it out there. I think everybody is super connected to what's happening in space, right? Because we're all really interested in our place in this world. Like, we're interested in where we are, where we're going, and where we've been. And I think all of those questions can be answered through space exploration. And especially in Florida, there's so much happening in our own backyards. Um, all of these things are happening right here. Like, why wouldn't you be excited about what's happening in your own backyard? And I think that Floridians just have it in our DNA that we are explorers, especially space explorers. Watching, for the old folks like you and me, Luis, like, we are, we're products of the space shuttle generation. We watched those growing up. Like, I saw them in school. I would go and watch them then launch. That's in our DNA. And the fact that things are happening just as frequently as the space shuttles were back from when we were kids in the 1990s is awesome. And it's
Hmm.
so cool to see that every single week something else is launching, from a backyard. I'm sitting here in my home office in Orlando, out of my window. My window faces east. I can sit here and watch rockets launch when I'm reporting on other things here. And that is not something that is different for a lot of people here. A lot of us have these eastward windows that we can see what's happening in our own backyard and see these things launch. It's so cool. We're so lucky.
I wondered for you because again, you work at the public radio station in Orlando, so I mean, you're reporting on a lot of different things. How has reporting on the space industry helped you as a journalist?
That's a really good question. And I think when I first picked up this beat, my whole my whole thing was, I'm gonna report on what's happening. These are the things that are happening. But I learned that there's a human connection to every space mission. And so you learn about the people, and you learn about how just connected they are to each particular mission. And I met so many cool people just by looking at stories that way. But also, every mission has some sort of economic connection to what's happening. And so we quickly learned that every space mission has some sort of human connection. No matter how impressive it is, there is some sort of connection to the central Floridian that we need to talk about. And I love the fact that that's what we've been doing at WMFE is looking at how all these missions affect the people that live and work in Central Florida or on the Space Coast. It's
Mm.
impressive.
You know, you because you know what's going on, and you know what NASA's working on, and what all these other companies are working on. You know, what's going to happen here in the next 10, 20 years? More space stations? Are we really going to Mars, or is that just a pipe dream? You know, we're going. You said we're going back to the moon. I mean, are we going back because we're going to do something more permanent there? What are people talking about? What's going to happen?
I honestly think in the next 10 years, you are going to be interviewing me on Mars. I think
Okay,
that's going to happen.
first of all, I had a great question and you almost blew it for me. But no, this is awesome. No, go ahead, tell me.
I think that we are going to get to a point where regular people, like journalists like you and I, are going to get to go to space. Maybe we won't be on Mars, but I feel like either you and I will both be on the moon, or I'm going to get a chance to go to space, or you're going to get a chance to go to space, and we're going to be able to interview each other from there.
No, first of all, you're the space reporter. You've earned that right. You're going before
I
anybody
know. I
else.
think you're going. I think you're
Yeah.
going first. I think you're going first.
No. I'm gonna say that, and I think you should be the guy to do it. I saw this though, and I was thinking I don't know how we're gonna interview each other. I love watching a lot of science programs on YouTube. They put a lot of great stuff up there. Some of it's not good, but some of it's really interesting. There was one I was watching, and I thought this was really interesting. How long it takes for a message to get from Earth to Mars.
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Yeah, and so I was
Yeah.
just thinking, wait a minute, what kind of interview do you think we're going to be having? I'm just going to ask a
It'll be
question.
an email interview. Yeah, it'll be an email interview. Yeah.
Okay. It's me asking a question and then just kind of waiting. Go ahead. Answer the
Or
question.
you just have to be there with me, and then we'll just do it on the surface of
You
Mars, and then send it back.
really, but you think in 10 years that we're going to have somebody out there? A human being will be going towards Mars.
So 10 years, I don't think Mars. I will say 10 years, someone will be on the moon,
Okay.
or someone will be in low Earth orbit. I think that there's plenty of opportunities for someone to go to low Earth orbit. I mean, in next month, SpaceX is sending a private mission again into space, but this time they'll dock to the International Space Station and come back. And this will be SpaceX's second private civilian mission in the past 2 years. So it's not wild to think that one of us will be sent up to space in the next 5 years or 10 years. Maybe the moon in 10, maybe Mars in 20. But I think there's going to be a time where you will be interviewing one of your public radio colleagues, and they're not going to be on this planet.
That is really interesting. I would take the trip just to get the miles, okay? Just because just to get I would collect a lot of miles on one trip. So
Would
no,
you though? Would you think Visa would give you those miles? Do you think Mastercard would give you those miles? Yeah.
why not? Come on. I was thinking about this because, like I said, I wanted to ask you this question, and to be honest, I mean, let's say there was a group of people going to Mars, and maybe 50 people, and they said, you know what, Brendan, we want you to come. You're going to be the journalist. You're going to be covering it for Planet Earth. You're going to keep all of us back here informed as to what's going on with this colony. But it takes what, 9 months to get there?
At
Is that
least,
the
at
fastest?
least, yeah, at least.
So going there, getting back, let's say they keep you there for a couple of years. So basically, you're going to spend 4 years away from planet Earth. Would you do it?
That's a hard question to answer. Um,
See, I'd go to the moon because it's not a
I
long
would,
trip.
I would, I always tell this story when I first picked up this beat. My wife, who is my biggest supporter,
And you could take her with you, by the way, if you want to. I don't know. I'm just
I don't
asking.
think she would go. But my wife, who's the biggest supporter, said, "You can report on this, but please don't ever go to space." And that was years ago. And that was years ago when things were a lot more difficult and all that. Um, I don't know if she would let me go to Mars. I don't think that I would. I don't think that I would want to have that conversation with her and say, "Hey, I'm going to leave you for 4 years to go to Mars." But I think it'd be an incredible opportunity for some sort of journalist, especially one that has a podcast like this, and he would go to Mars. And if that particular person went to Mars, I would hope he would give me an exclusive interview for my podcast.
I don't know
Um,
if I would do this 4 years. I mean, look, I mean, okay, so
exactly. Like, so what, like,
I know.
you realize why I wouldn't go? Why wouldn't you go?
Look, there is a part of me that thinks that that would be. Look, I'd love to go into space. I'd love to take that trip. To
Would you do
Mars,
the orbital trip?
the orbital trip
3 days
to
in orbit and
to
then come
what?
back home?
To the moon.
No, just an orbit
Oh,
around
orbital,
Earth.
orbital. Oh, yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely,
How
absolutely. And
about
I'd
the
love
moon?
to.
And then
I'd
and the moon.
love to. I'd love to because I know that I'd be back soon.
Yeah.
I think that Mars is fascinating, but I think that it's scary. It's kind of scary. Plus, you don't know if you're coming back. Something could happen, but I don't know. I don't know. I think it's one of those. It's funny when you said that. You're talking about your wife telling you that, and the first thought that came to mind. Remember, 2010, the movie,
Hmm.
and Roy Scheider's. He's telling his wife, "It's like I'm going. We're going to Jupiter."
Yeah.
And she drops the plate, the dinner plate. She can't because she knows he's gone for a long time,
Yeah.
and I think that would be a tricky thing. I'm not sure, but
That's hard. It's
uh,
it like the whole thing about space exploration is it's not a quick trip. Right? Anything you do, whether it's a robot or person, we're talking about years. Like, I
hmm
don't think humans are ready for that. We're not ready to say goodbye to somebody for Louise, you said 4 years to Mars. That's if you go to Mars, drop off, and then immediately come back.
right.
Like, we're talking about something 8, 9, 10, 12 years you're going to that planet.
Wow.
And while you're there, you're not on the surface of the planet. You're stuck in your spacecraft or stuck underground because it's not habitable to people. It's
Right.
it's not going to be an enjoyable few years. I don't know if anybody would want to do that.
Yeah. No, no. And I've been so fascinated with the Mars rovers and everything they've collected and seen, and I think that take aside what you see in the movies. I mean, like that Matt Damon movie, but you look at what the rovers are capturing,
Hmm.
and it's beautiful, but at the same time, you're looking at that like, I don't know. That's
That
I
world wants to kill me.
yeah,
Everything
no,
about that surface wants to kill me. Yeah,
I'm not sure. I mean, a space
yeah.
station possibly, but even then, because you'd have to get used to life in space, and I know that that takes a toll on people. Um, when did you fall in love with space, the idea of space? I mean, was it going back, because as you said, we grew up watching space shuttles, but I don't know, like, is that something that started early, or is that later in
Yeah.
life?
It started early for me. I went. I've told this story before. I mean, in fifth grade, my class went on a field trip to space camp. I grew up in Broward County, down there with you, and I didn't want to go. My dad wanted to go, and he needed to get his kid to go so he could be chaperone. And we went to space camp in fifth grade. That was 1997. Um, and it was awesome. It was such a great trip, and I learned so much about space because of that. I learned so much about my dad's uh, passion about it, and I wish I could learn more. The next year he died, and so I always kept that with me. That he took me to space camp, and that was what he wanted me to do. Right.
Mm,
I didn't have a chance to talk to him more about that. And we watched Space Shuttle Discovery launch together, and that was a moment that I'll always keep with me. And that's always been something that was very close. Like, that was something that I had. And in middle school, I was going to be an astronaut. Got to algebra, realized that wasn't going to be my thing. Um, and I and so I ended up taking another path. Eventually, as an adult, I was able to find a way to write about the stuff and talk about the stuff. And I think really the coolest thing that ever happened was the last space shuttle, or I'm sorry, the last human mission that launched. It was a SpaceX Crew Dragon mission that launched. It was on the anniversary of my father's death, and I realized that that had to say something. That he was looking down and saying, I'm covering this and watching this mission happen in real time, and he was the one that planted that seed. And so that's really what connected me to these things. And I always think about, what would he think about what's happening right now? And I think that he would be completely blown away by the fact that not only are there rocket launches happening pretty much every week here, but there are humans leaving this planet every 6 months, which was something that he wanted to make sure that I saw, and took me up to Kennedy Space Center to see. And I think he would be completely impressed by what's happening. And so my job is I always think about that. Every story I write, I always think about, what would my dad think about this, and what would he say about this, and he'd definitely be impressed and super excited about everything. And I hope he's proud of the stories I'm telling.
Oh, it definitely has to be. I think about what you said a second ago and where we're going to be in 10, 20 years. And so I wonder where space reporting is going to be, because you think about, like right now, really one of the big things is environmental reporting, and that's
Hmm.
becoming, and rightfully so. But if the space industry is going to continue to grow and we're going to expand more into space again, not just as countries, but even like I said, if these guys are really going to do this with tourists and get tourists up into space, it's going to become a regular thing. Where do you see the space reporting going from here?
That's a really good question, and it's something that we talk about a lot. Like the great thing about the space reporting beat is that we're all really friendly with each other. All of us, all of the space reporters, like we help each other out. We make sure that we're not getting screwed by these particular companies or whatever. But we have those conversations, and it's like, are we going to get sick and tired of reporting on, oh, we got another human mission launching next week? And the consensus is no, we're not. Like, this is like, we are we are in a position where everybody is excited about what happens on our beat. There is something cool happening every single day on our beat. But we also realize that we need to hold these companies accountable, and make sure that not only are we giving equal access to space, but making sure that we're not harming the planet that we're trying to leave. And so I think, on one hand, we have this enormous amount of people that are watching what we're doing and excited about the things that we report on. But on the other hand, we have this incredible responsibility to make sure that all of these actors are working in good faith and making sure that they're not taking advantage of the people that they work with and the planet that they live on. And we recognize that. We understand that responsibility that we have, and we will hopefully make sure we hold those in power accountable for those actions.
Well, like I said, you never know. You may be the guy who goes up into space. If you don't, you know what? We got to get you into a space movie. So the next time they make a space movie, we need to get you out to the audition so that somehow you're part of that in one way. Which leads me to finish up here. Let's have a little fun. Best movie that takes place in space. Yeah, what is it?
Easily, The Martian.
Okay, all
I
right.
love The Martian. The first person I ever interviewed on my podcast when I started Are We There Yet was Andy Weir, who wrote the book that The Martian was based on. And we talked about how rooted in hard science fiction that was. And if anybody's actually ever read The Martian, it is completely different than the actual movie with Matt Damon.
Oh, I'd imagine it always is. Yeah.
It's very It is literally him trying to survive on Mars. And when Andy Weir wrote that book, he sent it to a uh, an online community that fact checked all of it to make sure that it was literally rooted in science. And there's I won't take too much time here, but there is technology in the Martian. It's called Moxie, and
Mm,
the technology that turns the atmosphere of Mars into oxygen to breathe. On the latest Mars rover, Perseverance, Moxie is an actual experiment that actually turned the atmosphere into oxygen. So it like the Martian is rooted in actual science reality. And
wow.
that's why I love both the book and the movie is because both of them were rooted in that. So
It
that
was
is
it,
my answer.
no, great answer. I have not read the book. I enjoyed the movie. I really did.
The movie's great.
It was.
Who doesn't like Matt Damon, right? You gotta
No,
love
well,
it.
I
You
mean
gotta love
that
it.
too. But I know it's just that because I know that filming anything that's about space to me, if it's done right, it's when you get that the loneliness of it and the vastness of it, because it's infinity. It feels like an infinity
It
that you're,
is.
and so
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And to me, it was well done, so well done. I would say I'd go back. I'm going to go back to my childhood and really, I'm not going to do the obvious like Star Wars and those movies as much as I love them. Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica and all that stuff.
Mm,
What I loved though actually was 2010, and I saw that after 2000 or before 2001 because 2001 came out before I was born.
mhm.
But I saw 2010 and I was so just fascinated by this idea and like one that you'd have to sleep for a while because it's such a long trip and could we do that and then getting out to Jupiter and because I've always found to me my favorite planets were Jupiter and Saturn
Jupiter's
and
awesome. Saturn's
just
amazing.
I
Yeah.
just looking at them and I'm just like oh my god I'd love to be that close. So that was I would say my favorite. All right, worst space movie ever. I want to hear this one from you.
Oh no, I don't know if I can do that.
Oh yeah,
Worst
I've got one, but I want to hear yours.
worst space movie ever.
Come on, there's so many.
Oh, see, I don't want to yuck on someone's yum. I don't I, what's your worst space movie? I'm gonna have to ask you first.
God, no. Okay. This one, as a child, was one of my favorite movies. But when you look back on it now, it was so cheesy, so terrible. And I love listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson shredded to pieces because he's like, that's not anything close to reality.
Uh,
Is Disney's The Black Hole.
okay.
Loved that movie as a kid.
Uh,
I love the visuals. Granted, they don't hold up anymore, but as a kid, I thought that was glorious. I love the music. The music still, the soundtrack to that movie still holds up. The villain in the movie, and really the robot Maximilian,
uh,
still scary to this day. Um, and it's just that whole idea of like this, the black hole. It's just always been that the universal terror.
uh,
As a kid, it was just one of my favorites. But obviously, looking back now, it just when you watch, and I watched it a few months ago. I can't remember where it was on one of the streaming services, and I was like, "Oh, let me see this," and it was just like, "Oh, it's one of those movies that doesn't hold up too bad." But also because looking at it, it's like, no, it's just not. But I love Neil deGrasse Tyson when he shreds it to pieces.
yeah.
If you want to get him angry, just get him worked up.
Just
Just
bring-
like, let's talk about Disney's Black Hole and just watch him go, what? But that's mine. So
Okay.
come
See,
on, you have one.
I've never seen that one. Um,
Please do one day and tell me what you think.
I'm gonna go watch it tonight now.
Oh, please do.
I'll say so. I recently watched Armageddon. It's terrible. It's terrible. And I watched Armageddon recently, and then I also watched Don't Look Up, and I watched them close enough to realize the the interesting thing about watching both of those is to look at those through the eyes of like the media, like
Mhm.
how the media presents these issues, and seeing in Don't Look Up it was a satire, but the media did a much better job at
Mhm.
explaining to the planet that it was going to be destroyed than Armageddon did. And also the physics of Armageddon are absolutely terrible and would never work. Um, but I didn't know that when I first watched it. I only knew that when I started talking to experts. But I like, again, if you're going to talk about these things, like the fact that these issues are in popular culture, I'm okay with. Whether they're wrong or right, that's fine. But at least we're talking about them in popular culture, right? So that's the most important thing. Um, yeah, I'll give you that. Another terrible movie is Space Camp. I loved it as a kid.
I remember that
It's a
movie.
terrible movie, but I
Yeah.
loved it as a kid. There's also
Yeah.
Space Cowboys.
Oh,
You know,
that one. That's the one with Tommy Lee Jones
all of them,
and
all of them.
yeah, no, they had like it was like a group of older men
Yep,
and like, hey, let's send old guys into space. And say old guys, but I mean they were senior citizens at that
they were
time. And
old guys, old white
oh,
guys into space. Yeah.
was Clint Eastwood in that movie?
It was, yeah, Tommy Lee Jones, Clint Eastwood. I hear my wife yelling at me, telling me who is that was actually in the movie.
Oh my God, it
But
was. No, you're. See, I told you they're bad space movies.
there are bad space movies. But
Oh,
I'm also a little upset that you talked about Battlestar Galactica because I started watching. I've actually never watched Battlestar Galactica. I got through season one. I'm on season two now. But I'm getting there. I'm
now
getting
listen,
there as
I grew.
well.
I mean, I'm talking about the original show from the 70s.
Oh yeah, no, I'm
So
not there. I'm not
yeah,
there. Yeah.
I let me tell you something. I mean, I grew up, in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was, I mean, obviously Star Wars, but it was Battlestar Galactica. Another great show that I loved was Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers was a great show. Loved it. Just the whole idea. You could see when you look at it now, it's like, oh my God, all these shows were just, they were trying so hard to steal from Star Wars.
Mhm.
They saw what he made and all the money, and they're like, let's just find a way to spoof it. Um, but yeah, those were all those shows I grew up watching and were my favorites. And yeah, I fell in love with that idea of like going into space. I did have a dream once of being an astronaut, but just like you, I think I
We
got
all
to
did, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
no, I did.
Growing up in Florida, you had to be, right?
I did, and I
Yeah.
was even in high school. I was in the astronomy club, but then I got to algebra 2 and realized, oh darn,
I got to algebra 1 and
uh,
I realized. But I'm interested that you brought up Buck Rogers because one of the most famous sayings from our local politician, Bill Nelson, who was a
mm,
senator, who went to space and who was a huge proponent of the space industry and who is now the NASA administrator. I've always talked whenever I talk to him and we talked about financing. He says, "If there's no bucks, there's no Buck Rogers." And that is his thing that he always talks every time you ask him about funding for space exploration. He says, "I love space, but if there's no buck, there's no Buck Rogers." And that's a very important thing. If you don't have that public buy-in for these things, which all of these science fiction shows that we're talking about help build that public buy-in. If you don't have that public buy-in, you're not going to get public support for it, and you're not going to get public funding for it. So if there's no Bucks, there are no Buck Rogers, and I think it's the relationship between how much public support there is for these programs comes from how much fictional support there is from these different things that we're talking about.
right.
If you don't have that, then you're not going to get the money from Congress to make it happen. So
Well,
they're so important. Like space and pop culture is so important to get
it
people to
is.
buy into these things.
It is. I couldn't agree with more. And yeah, we have to keep that interest up so that the public doesn't wane on this and wants to continue to push for that exploration. Obviously, we have the three billionaires who will continue. So I guess that book I bought on Amazon is helping in a way, sort of. I don't know, but yeah. And then we've got you to report on it. So that's the best part. And Brendan, I appreciate it. Continued success with the podcast as well. And thanks for sharing the stories on the Reporter Studio, man.
And thank you so much for having me to talk about these things. I mean, It's so awesome to talk to a like-minded person like you about the excitement of space. So I'm
Look,
happy to come back anytime.
just remember, I get the first interview when you're up there, buddy.
Oh, we're going together, brother. We're going together.
We'll do a talk show from space. I'm
I will
ready.
I will be your producer and you are the talk show host. We got this. We're
No, no, no,
taking
no.
we're
We're co-hosting this one. I promise. We're co-hosting this one. All right, Brendan.